At 4:30 in the morning, drivers on a Los Angeles freeway began making frantic emergency calls. A little girl stood alone on the shoulder of Interstate 405. In her arms had been her baby sister. Within hours, 3 people would be dead. And investigators would uncover a chain of events stretching across Los Angeles that shocked the nation. This is the story of Danielle Johnson. Dark music rises. Aerial footage of Los Angeles before sunrise. Traffic lights flicker through the darkness. News reports begin playing over one another. Authorities are investigating a series of connected deaths across Los Angeles County. Police say the incidents span from Woodland Hills to Redondo Beach. Investigators believe all 3 scenes are connected. Eventually, she left college before completing her degree. Years later, she began studying Reiki, a healing practice that focuses on energy work and wellness. What started as a personal interest would eventually become the foundation of an online career. In 2010, Danielle launched social media accounts focused on spirituality. Over the years, she expanded into astrology, numerology, energy healing, and personal guidance. Her online persona evolved under the name Danielle Ioka. Followers were drawn to her confidence and direct communication style. She created popular astrology discussions and personality analyses that generated significant engagement. As her audience expanded, so did her business ventures. She offered spiritual consultations, healing materials, personalized services, and various forms of guidance marketed to followers seeking answers and direction. By the mid-2010s, her influence had grown substantially. Thousands interacted with her content daily. Many supporters viewed her not merely as a content creator but as a trusted guide. Yet not everyone agreed with her methods. Some critics questioned her interpretations and expertise. Others argued that her content relied heavily on broad statements that could apply to almost anyone. Despite criticism, her audience continued growing. And her online presence became an increasingly important part of her identity. At the center of the tragedy was another life. A man named Jaylen Allen Chaney. According to official records, Jaylen was 29 years old. He had served in the United States Air Force and worked as a technician while stationed in Italy. Family members remembered him as someone who enjoyed science, loved Star Wars, and hoped to become a meteorologist someday. Those who knew him described him as caring, humorous, and family-oriented. At some point around 2020, Jaylen and Danielle became involved in a relationship. The relationship would eventually lead them to build a household together in Los Angeles. By 2023, they welcomed a daughter named Soleil. From the outside, they appeared to be building a future. Inside the relationship, however, family members later described significant tensions and conflicts. Throughout 2023 and early 2024, some observers noticed changes. Family members expressed concerns. Certain followers reported increasingly alarming social media posts. Messages became more urgent, more apocalyptic, more focused on predictions of major global events. Then came the total solar eclipse scheduled for April 8, 2024. Across North America, millions prepared to observe a rare astronomical event. Scientists explained the eclipse through astronomy. Schools organized viewing activities. Communities gathered in anticipation. But Danielle's online post suggested she viewed the event very differently. In the days before April 8, she repeatedly warned followers about what she believed was approaching. Many people saw the posts. Almost nobody recognized them as possible warning signs of an unfolding tragedy. According to investigators, the final hours began inside the family's Woodland Hills apartment. Neighbors later reported hearing arguments coming from the residents during the night. Authorities say events escalated during the early morning hours of April 8. Investigators determined that Jaylen Chaney suffered fatal stab wounds inside the apartment. The exact details of what occurred during those moments remain known only through evidence collected at the scene and investigative findings. One child was present inside the home. That child would later become the sole surviving eyewitness to the events that followed. The hours before sunrise on April 8, 2024, would become some of the most heartbreaking moments in this entire case. After leaving the apartment complex in Woodland Hills, Danielle Johnson drove south through Los Angeles with her 2 daughters inside the vehicle. Security footage later confirmed her departure from the apartment complex. Investigators would eventually piece together her route through evidence, witness statements, and surveillance recordings. As the city slept, traffic on Interstate 405 was light but steady. Long-haul drivers, early commuters, and delivery workers moved through the darkness, unaware that a tragedy was unfolding nearby. Then, at approximately 4:30 a.m., emergency calls began flooding dispatch centers. Drivers reported seeing children on the freeway. The reports sounded almost impossible. A child standing beside one of the busiest highways in Southern California. Some callers initially believed they had seen an abandoned vehicle nearby. Others thought they had witnessed a traffic accident. But as more calls came in, the horrifying reality began to emerge. Somewhere along the freeway, a 9-year-old girl had been forced into a situation no child should ever experience. Authorities later stated that both children had exited the moving vehicle. The older child suffered serious injuries. The infant, only months old, was struck by a passing vehicle. The freeway immediately became an active emergency scene. First responders raced toward the location. Traffic slowed. Lights flashed across the darkness. Paramedics worked desperately. But for baby Soleil, there was nothing they could do. She was pronounced deceased at the scene. The 9-year-old survived. Injured and traumatized, she was transported to a nearby medical facility for treatment. Investigators would later identify her as the only surviving witness to the events of that night. The only person who had seen everything from beginning to end. As emergency personnel worked along the freeway, Danielle Johnson was no longer there. She had continued driving south. And the final chapter of the tragedy was only minutes away. By around 5 a.m., witnesses in Redondo Beach reported seeing a dark Porsche traveling at extremely high speed. Several people later described the vehicle moving dangerously fast along the roadway. Moments later came the crash. The Porsche left the roadway and collided with a tree. The impact was catastrophic. Nearby residents were jolted awake by the sound. Some rushed outside. Others immediately called 911. Emergency crews arrived within minutes. The scene was devastating. The vehicle had sustained massive damage. Danielle Johnson was found inside. She was pronounced dead at the scene. With that crash, investigators were suddenly faced with 3 separate crime scenes stretching across Los Angeles County. A freeway, an apartment complex, and a fatal collision site near the Pacific Coast Highway. At first glance, the incidents appeared unrelated. But investigators would soon discover that all 3 were connected. And the full scope of the tragedy was only beginning to emerge. Several hours later, attention shifted back to Woodland Hills. Inside the Montecito apartment complex, neighbors were beginning their normal morning routines. One resident noticed something unusual. The front door to Danielle and Jaylen's apartment stood open. That alone was alarming. But then came something even more troubling. There appeared to be blood. Concern quickly turned into fear. The resident contacted family members and emergency services. Soon afterward, police officers arrived. They entered the apartment and made a grim discovery. Jaylen Allen Chaney was found inside. Investigators determined he had been fatally stabbed. What had initially seemed like separate incidents now formed a single chain of violence. Authorities began connecting the timeline. A homicide in Woodland Hills. A fatal freeway incident involving 2 children. A deadly crash in Redondo Beach. The locations were miles apart. Yet they were all connected through one family. As news spread throughout Los Angeles, shock quickly followed. Many struggled to understand how such a devastating sequence of events could occur within only a few hours. Lost amid the headlines was the life of Jaylen Allen Chaney. Friends and family remembered him as far more than a victim in a news story. He was a son, a brother, a father, and a veteran. According to family members, Jaylen had dreams that extended far beyond military service. He loved science and weather. Those close to him said he hoped one day to pursue meteorology. His military service had taken him overseas. He had worked hard to build a future. And by all accounts, he deeply cared about his children. In interviews following the tragedy, relatives spoke openly about their grief. Many were searching for answers. Many were struggling to understand how events had escalated to such a devastating conclusion. For those who knew him personally, the headlines could never fully capture who he was. Behind every news report was a life that mattered. A future that would never be realized. And a family left behind to mourn. As investigators continued their work, attention increasingly focused on Danielle Johnson's online activity. For years, she had cultivated a substantial audience. Thousands followed her posts. Many had purchased services. Others viewed her as a trusted voice within online spiritual communities. But after the tragedy, followers began revisiting her final messages. Screenshots spread rapidly across social media. Posts that once seemed unusual now appeared deeply troubling. Particular attention centered on messages connected to the solar eclipse. Some observers wondered whether her beliefs had influenced her actions. Others cautioned against drawing conclusions before all evidence was known. Investigators examined available information carefully. Yet one important fact remained. No social media post, no belief system, and no online theory could fully explain what occurred inside a person's mind during those final hours. Experts often warn against oversimplifying complex tragedies. Human behavior rarely has a single cause. Mental health factors, personal relationships, emotional crises, stressors, and individual circumstances can intersect in ways that are difficult to fully understand. As a result, many questions surrounding this case may never receive complete answers. Among all the victims connected to this tragedy, one child survived. The 9-year-old girl. Her identity has largely been protected due to her age. And rightly so. What she experienced that morning is almost unimaginable. Within a matter of hours, she witnessed events that no child should ever have to endure. She lost her infant sister. She lost her mother. And she lost a father figure from her household. Beyond the physical injury she suffered, the emotional impact of such trauma can last for years. Mental health experts often explain that children exposed to severe traumatic events may face long journeys toward healing. Recovery is not measured in days or weeks. It can take years. Sometimes decades. Yet children are also remarkably resilient. With proper support, counseling, stability, and care, many survivors are able to rebuild their lives despite unimaginable circumstances. Today, the surviving child remains the most important person in this entire story. Not because of what she witnessed, but because she still has a future ahead of her. Cases like this leave behind more questions than answers. Could warning signs have been recognized sooner? Could intervention have changed the outcome? Did family members, friends, followers, or neighbors notice signals they did not fully understand at the time? These questions emerge after nearly every major tragedy. And yet they rarely have simple answers. Human behavior is complicated. Crisis often develops behind closed doors. Sometimes those closest to a situation see pieces of the puzzle but never the entire picture. Other times, the warning signs only become obvious after the fact. Looking backward can create an illusion that events were predictable. In reality, many tragedies are only understood once investigators assemble all the pieces afterward. In less than 4 hours, a chain of violence stretched from Woodland Hills to Interstate 405 and finally to Redondo Beach. 3 lives were lost. A child survived. Families were forever changed. And a city was left searching for answers. The story of Danielle Johnson is not merely a story about social media. It is not merely a story about spirituality, online influence, or conspiracy beliefs. At its core, it is a story about human tragedy. About lives that mattered. About the devastating consequences of violence. And about a young survivor whose future now carries the weight of an unimaginable past. As investigators completed their work and headlines slowly faded, one truth remained. For the families involved, this story did not end when the news cameras left. The consequences would continue long after the public moved on. And perhaps the most important lesson is this. Behind every headline is a real family. Behind every statistic is a real life. And behind every tragedy is a story that deserves to be remembered with care, accuracy, and compassion. Subscribe to my channel. Take care of yourself.